Welcome to the 14th episode of Timely Topics. I'm your host, Rory and I'm excited to be joined by my excellent co-host, Jen Matthew.
Hello.
Our theme for this episode is regret. We've all heard the phrase, no regrets. But is that really possible? We're diving into the choices we wish we could change, the lessons we've learned, and how regret shapes our lives. We'll be asking each other if it's okay to have regrets and giving our thoughts on how to live and learn through the power of regret. And as always, of course, we'll be rounding things off with our good idea or bad idea segment. You ready?
Let's go.
Welcome to the Timely Topics Show, where we're bringing you all the buzz and banter of today's business conversations. Straight from our studios in downtown Hartford, with your hosts, Rory McGloin and Jennifer Matthew.
All right, everybody, so welcome to our 14th episode. Jen, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So spring is upon us, and it's usually at this juncture in our podcast that we would spend some time bantering back and forth at some of the things that we've been up to. So before the episode was recorded, Jen and I got together to talk about the things that we've been up to and what we might enlighten our listeners to discuss. When Jen asked me a very poignant question, do we really need to have banter? Do we really need to have small talk? Which led to what you're about to discuss, Jen, right? So what is the value and the power and the influence of small talk?
So I think small talk, we fill in the spaces. Most times you feel really uncomfortable, right? Because you go up to someone and you're like, hey, you know, that weather or those sports, right? And you have a conversation with someone. But what I really think that does is that I think it takes away the space or the opportunity to have really meaningful dialogue, meaningful questions, because it depends on how long you have standing in line with that person. Or if you are connecting really quickly over lunch, you only have a certain amount of time. So are we filling it with just content off the cuff because it feels safer, it's easier?
Well, I guess the thing about it is, right, is that, like, do we need it, right? Is it necessary? Or should we just dive right in and get to the point, right? We're kind of basically asking ourselves, to the listeners, right, should we just skip all the small talk at the beginning, go right to correspondence, hit up Timely Topics? We can shorten the episode by about 10 minutes.
That's true. I do think our listeners, though, like, appreciate learning a little bit more about us and the stuff that we're doing. Maybe we assume that's the case.
We hope so. And actually, you've just raised a really interesting point, and that is that when we provide banter, when we provide small talk, we are providing self-disclosures. And before we got to recording today, we went around the room, we asked the team, we said, what's the value of it? And Kate, who's our marketing coordinator, said, you know, it allows us to learn things about people, and it's such an important point, right? Because those self-disclosures are what might offer opportunities to get to know people, and when you get to know people, then you might have a more productive or engaging conversation with them. So if we're going to lean on the side that small talk still has maybe some value left in society, and hopefully for future episodes as well, what are the tactics that we should be using to create small talk? So instead of having pre-planned banter for episode today, we figured we would just ask each other some questions as to what's going on. So Jen, what have you been up to?
So what have I been up to just in my life?
Yeah, just
so many.
You were on a trip, right?
Yeah, I was recently, and it's funny because our last episode we were chatting about Vegas. I ended up going to Vegas, not for a conference, for a personal event. I went to a friend's wedding, which was such an amazing experience.
So Vegas.
Yeah, I know, right? But I had never been, and actually had the perfect dress in my closet for the last 2 years, and I was like, where do I wear a hot pink sequins dress? Oh, a wedding in Vegas.
Wedding in Vegas.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But before we were going, I asked you for recommendations. You're like, listen, John, you don't drink, you don't eat meat. Where am I supposed to tell you to go?
Right.
What am I doing here? And I think I was a little bit, indifferent about my experience because I've only ever been to Vegas on conferences and trips at work, which is entirely different than when you're going for personal reasons. And I actually really loved it. I don't know if I told you, but I had a great time. It was awesome.
Yeah, I get it because, like we've talked about before, like it's something that is a curated experience. And so now we have something in common that we find ways to enjoy. I'm glad that you had fun out there, by the way, because I think you were going in and being like, I don't think this is going to be any good. And I was like, just let it be.
The wedding part I was so interested in because, like, Elvis wedding, how cool is that? And it ended up being so awesome.
So I got to tell you something.
Yeah.
I'm bursting at the seams this morning. Okay. I finished a book called Meditations for Mortals, 4 weeks to embrace your limitations and make time for what counts, by Oliver Burkeman. We love books on this show. Let me pause and tell everybody right now, like, if you are at a juncture in your life where you are trying to manage and answer the question of, like, what are you doing? Here's a small talk conversation for you, right? This book for me was 2.5 hours long to listen to. I enjoyed every single segment of it. We discussed it, and it's a complete plug for the book, Oliver Burkeman. What it does is it breaks down and it poses to you the question of, what are you making urgencies for? And when you are reacting to things, is it because it's something that you want to react to, or is it somebody else's urgency? And I suppose if you can figure out the answer to that question, then you are already living a fulfilling life. So for me, that book has really influenced me, and it's skyrocketed to the top of my all-time number one most influential book, displacing Simon Sinek's Start With Why. It's a big deal.
Wow.
We still love Simon, of course, and if he wants to come on the show, we'd be happy to have him.
Yeah.
Invitation's open for Oliver as well. But that's my book recommendation for you, Jen.
So everyone that has this sense of urgency to go download the book, you can hit pause on the podcast for a second, run over. And I'm actually feeling this deep fear of missing out because we had this conversation this morning about this book, and you go into this really great dialogue about it and had a ton of awesome connections to that. I wish we were hitting record so that our listeners could hear all of that. But the second you started telling me about it, what did I do?
You wanted to grab your phone and say, hold on, stop talking. I got to go download the book, to which I told you stop, because that's not an urgency right now. You can do that later, but right now we're having a small talk
And guess what? I didn't get the chance to do. I didn't get a chance to go save it. So in a little bit when we're done recording, you have to remind me, because my thing is I don't like to miss out on really great content. And I take you and a few others, I take seriously the references or the opportunities. Like, I don't know why I spent a little bit too much time with you, but when you say, you have to listen to this episode or you have to listen to this book, I always go and do that because I think that it has really made some great strides. And we'll talk later in this episode about some books that we've read that kind of led to us in these realizations that we've had recently.
I think too, like it gives some credence to like the concept of a book club, right? Because if you're spending a lot of time with a person, whether it's your partner at home, your work colleagues, maybe your business partners, I think reading and consuming similar content allows for shared experiences in an asynchronous fashion. And then you get to come back and see, do we agree on these ideas? And is this something that we can use as a foundation for a conversation, for a business platform, for how we serve our customers? And so I'm a big fan of if you have a handful of relationships that you lean or are interdependent on, read the same books or watch the same shows. You don't have to do it together per se, but then come back together and maybe it serves as a foundation for things.
And you know what I think is really interesting? We've had this conversation before where we're saying we listen to a lot of thought leadership. We've read a ton of books between the two of us, and we're not necessarily hearing something for the first time. Mm-hmm. We are maybe hearing things that we know to be true, but we're hearing it said in a different way. And I love listening to different people's perspectives. I hear it and I go, wow, that aha moment isn't me hearing it for the first time. It's me making that connection in a different way. And then I say it to you and you connect it to something else that's going on in your world. And you say it back to me and I was like, oh my God, that is such a cool, fulfilling sort of circle of conversation that's why I think there's value in having conversations like that in a book club sort of way.
You just mentioned this idea that it's something you know to be true. And just for the scientists out there, I don't believe that truth is attainable, but should always be pursued.
Right.
For the record. But I do feel like what you're getting at there is that it adds depth to things that make sense to you, right? And that's really important. Let's change gears here one last time, right? Because we're a free-flowing podcast here this morning. It's baseball season. It's opening day. Spring is here, right? We're in this space now where the season starts to shift. Mm-hmm. If you're in Connecticut, the sun's not going down now till 7:18, 7:19.
I'm happier. I have to be honest.
I noticed that everybody's in a better mood this week around the office. That's fantastic. We've got a really cool event coming up where we are taking, for the first time ever, Timely Topics is hitting the road. We're driving southeast down to Foxwoods Resort and Casino for the Connecticut Sports Legacy Fueling the Future event, Shaping Connecticut's Future, hosted by Rebellion. There's going to be so many amazing, cool people down there. And we get to go, and we're going to have a chance to do some live podcasting and interview all sorts of people from Connecticut who have their hands and fingerprints all over the industry of sports.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. So Rebellion's been running this event series over the last year, and they do different themes, different topics. We had an AI featured topic back in February, and Michelle Cody on our team went down and facilitated a panel on that. We have this one around sports, entertainment, and not just that from the baseline of what that means to you, but really the innovation, the entrepreneurship, the development of what that industry has meant to Connecticut. And that is huge. I don't think a lot of people realize that sports, really, there's a lot of history and there's a lot surrounding our workforce and our ecosystem around that topic. So I'm really excited to dive in. I get to host a panel channel in addition to doing the live podcast. So we'll share more next week as we start building this out and we get to the event. But it's just such a cool opportunity.
So before we move into correspondence, we're going to have a pre-correspondence moment right now. So we will have the event linked. So on the podcast post here, you'll be able to find a link to that in our comments. So if there's still tickets available by the time the podcast comes out, come down,
Absolutely.
hang out, say what's up. We'd love to see
and
you.
If not, there's going to be another one coming up, I believe, in June. So we'll definitely share more information if you can't make it to this event.
But go ahead and take a look at the list of speakers that are going to be there. And if you have a thought on somebody that you'd like to see us try to nab for an interview, and more specifically, a question that you'd like to have us interview. For those of our UConn Huskies fans out there, Charles Aquandu will be there, former men's basketball player. Jen Rosati, women's Connecticut basketball legend, who is now the president of the Connecticut Sun. She'll be there, both on our list of folks that we're hoping to interview, along with a wide range of entrepreneurs and folks that are leading startups right here out of Connecticut. All right, so speaking of correspondence, let's dive into some feedback and comments that we got from our listeners over the last several weeks. I'll start. Peggy noted in reference to our latest episode on passion and the difficulty of finding your passion, especially when everybody else around you feels like they has theirs. Quote, all great points. I feel as I get older, I know more about myself, and I'm way more comfortable in my skin and in my life. Peggy, thanks for checking in, and certainly resonated with me. I think as you get older, you get a little bit more confident in who you are and just letting things be.
Yeah, I love that. And Greg Wolf loves to send in nice comments via email and on social, so we appreciate that, Greg. And he said, we say in my family, to be enthusiastic, you must act enthusiastic, and that gives you passion in life. Love that, Greg.
Yeah, Greg, thanks for checking in. Always love getting your commentary. Next up, Zach B. on LinkedIn, particularly on the Luck episode, quote, a thought-provoking leadership podcast, insightful for those individuals at any phase in their business development. Hey, Zach, thanks for checking in. We appreciate the feedback, and we hope you enjoy this next episode too.
And Mary Kay commented on Haley's interview, and she said, great to see you, Haley Seeger, founder of One With, sharing her journey. Thank you for the shout out. Your passion and insights are truly inspiring. Keep shining. So Haley did a nice shout out to Mary Kay, which is one of her business advisors and supporter over the years. It was great to have her on.
Lots of good engagement on that interview. Yeah. So well done. As always, if you have ideas for an interview, let us know. Last up, John M., speaking of an interview, gave a big shout out to our friend Dennis House, quote, Dennis House is a Connecticut icon. I grew up watching him on the local news, so I enjoyed hearing his story. Keep up the great work, Rory and Jen. Love these insider interviews with local legends. Us too.
Yeah.
A really cool opportunity to have Dennis in the studio. He's such a ray for Connecticut and loves everything about it. So
yeah, and I love that he tells the story of Connecticut, and it was awesome to hear the story of Dennis. So that was a really great interview. Yeah. Great job.
Well said, Jen. If you have something that you'd like to share with us, please consider sending us an email, collaboratory@uconn.edu. You can also find us on LinkedIn at Connecticut Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. We're also on Instagram, TikTok, and our YouTube channel at @UConn.CCI.
Guess what just happened?
No way, you're kidding me.
Hey, did you hear about...
Are you sure about that? I can't believe they... Really?
It's time for Timely Topics.
In this episode's Timely Topics, we're talking about regret. Would you want to go back in time and redo something that you regret? Or do you ever think your regrets inspire and influence your future decisions and what you prioritize? Jen and I decided to dive into the hidden lessons and the so-called power of regret in an effort to shed some light on how regret might not be so bad and may, in fact, fuel your next great moment. Let's get started. All right, so the topic is regret. But in actuality, Jen and I both finished Daniel Pink's 2022 book, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. And it became the inspiration ultimately for the episode. So real quickly, for many of our listeners who probably haven't had a chance to read or listen to the book, Pink goes into a discussion about how regret has typically been portrayed as a negative thing. In fact, opens the book by discussing we shouldn't have regrets, we should live life without regret. But when you dive deeper, especially into some of the research on regret, we actually find that it can be a healthy way to deal with things that have happened in the past. And more importantly, it often is going to fuel many of the decisions that we make in the future. So whether we want to acknowledge it or not, we have regrets, and they're actually still influencing us today. So Jen, let's just start. What was your take on the book? I know you loved it. It was a recommendation I provided, and you actually finished it before I finished it. So what was your big takeaway? And let's start there and we'll move backwards.
So other than the fact that I bragged that you told me it was a great book, you had gotten about halfway through, and then I texted you when I finished because I was proud that I got to the end of it before you. But no, really, I thought it was awesome. And like I said, at the beginning of this episode, that I really do take to heart the ideas that you share with me or the new podcasts and books to listen to, because we only have, as we talked about, only so much time to consume, and we want to listen to things that are going to create impact and for us to be able to share with other people, right? I know I don't listen to books or read books just for it to do good on me. It's what am I learning that I can then inspire others with. And I took first, when you said regret, my immediate feeling was like, ooh, do I want to read a book about regret? Like, that is always such like a faux pas. It's always that feeling of negativity in me, of like all the things I wish I did or I wish I didn't do, and the feelings that it brought to me today. And actually, like you mentioned, he doesn't really focus a whole lot on the negativity and the irony in the book about like the no regret tattoos, right? Is that people go and get them removed. So there is actually some regret in the not having regret, because people realize that regret is actually a very, very healthy thing. My favorite part of the book was the talking about the neuroscience of it, and that regret is actually seen as you having a healthy brain, that we as humans have the ability to be so reflective. We've talked about this on the podcast before, but we have the ability to be in past, present, and future at various states. And what regret is, which I love that he said, it's a process. Regret isn't necessarily a thing that we think and we do, but it's a process we go through when we're here in this moment. We can reflect back on our lives and say that I wish I had done something, or I wish I didn't do something, because in that moment of going back in time, you can fast forward into the future and project what your life would have been if those decisions were different.
Yeah. So we kicked off the conversation a couple weeks ago, and you asked me a question: do you have any regrets? And you probably recall very quickly I said no. I feel very contented, and I was quite happy with myself in the answer until I finished the second half of the book. And then, as Jen just mentioned, I realized I don't think I have a healthy brain if I don't have any regrets. Right. No, I think it came from this place of being taught and told to live by your values, and you'll have no regrets, and it'll be all good. And as I look back in life, I really didn't have very many things that I didn't feel like aligned with my value system. Upon digging deeper, then I realized, well, maybe I probably do have some things that I wish I had maybe done differently, some things that I had given more or less attention to. And is that inspiring and influencing decisions I make today? Well, the answer is yes. So in just a little bit, we're going to try to tie this to the business space for a second, right? For all of you soon-to-be entrepreneurs out there, maybe you are thinking about some regrets that you had about not pursuing something. Well, let me fast forward into the book a little bit, and they did a really wide regret survey with tens of thousands of people from all around the world. So if you go to Daniel Pink's website, there actually is a link where you can go and submit your regrets. And throughout the course of the book, he talks about different types of regrets: relationship regrets, regrets around not getting enough education, regrets around not taking enough risks. And some of the most popular regrets that were submitted were around not taking certain risks. And in many cases, when you got to the section on business, it wasn't that nobody regret taking risks and failing. It was people getting older in life and looking back and saying, I wish I had taken more risks when it came to business, because looking back, it would have been good for me. So as you think about in your own life right now, like, what are some things that you may have wished you could have done? The good news is that if you're still processing that thought, you're still here with us. And so there's still opportunity to potentially put the next opportunity into play and to not have maybe that same regret again.
Can we pause and talk about values, your favorite topic?
Sure.
In the book, and when you think about just regret in your life, you mentioned the word values. And what I think is really insightful here is when we look back on things we may regret, it ties very much in to what we value in our lives, right? Mm-hmm. So I will be completely self-disclosing now and share that I regret some parts of my education. I wish I had taken it more seriously. And that's actually very common, right? Or a common thread that we hear from individuals. It's probably because I've spent so much of my adult time now seeking additional forms of higher education, seeking education on my own through books and learning, that I just think knowledge is such an amazing opportunity. And I think I could have done more of that when I was younger and wish I had. And that then means one of my core values is learning. And so it makes sense to me that a core value of mine being learning, my regret for not taking learning seriously, like it's an alignment.
Yeah, one that stands out to you. So to tie this to the business world a little bit, and Jeff Bezos, and talking a little bit about how he got Amazon started, he talks about this concept of a regret minimization framework. And so humans love frameworks, by the way. Like we love like checklists.
Or you, social scientists.
Yeah, programs that'll help me feel like I'm really maximizing my time. But check this one out for those of you that are maybe thinking about wanting to get started. He goes down this path, but I'll summarize it, of talking about, I'm going to ask myself a question. Will I regret this or will I not regret this when I'm 80 years of age? If you were so fortunate to live to that age, right? Will you regret not going down that path? And he actually talks about how that was a huge factor in him starting Amazon. And the reason that we bring this in is because it's this process of fast forwarding, right, in your mind, and humans have the ability to do this. We can project into the future, and we have to ask ourselves, like, will I regret not making this investment? Will I regret not taking this course seriously? Will I regret not staying or leaving this particular partner? And it gives you an opportunity to project the life that you may think you want to have today. And so often, really, why don't we take risks, right? Because we're nervous, we're scared, we don't think we have the right amount of money or resources, the education to make it happen. But if you project in the future, you have to ask yourself, does my future self have more money, more time, more resources, a better social circle? I'm hoping that many of us will say yes, and thereby likely we probably won't regret it in the future because future self has more of what we need to accomplish today's challenges.
Yeah, and what I also like is the difference between regretting actions that were taken and then regretting inaction. And Pink talks a bit about this in the book, and there's the opportunity to assess whether or not does one of those make a bigger impact, and do you regret more or for longer a doing or not doing of something. And I like a lot about what he says. And I don't know if you have thoughts as I'm saying that, but
yeah, I do, because what stands out to me is like there's a number of businesses that have probably some pretty big regrets for some things that they didn't pull the trigger on, right? So if what we're saying right now is that people are more likely to regret things they didn't do, well, let's put it into business context. So for example, Blockbuster had a chance at one stage to acquire Netflix. Oops. Kodak actually had some leads on the first digital cameras as far back as 1975. It's noted they shelved it because they were worried about cannibalizing their own film sales. That didn't really work out in their favor. So I always like to think about, right, businesses sometimes, like we see them as these big entities, but they're people. Right. And they're people that have feelings and thoughts, and they have concerns and worries just like anybody else. And here you have examples, probably looking back going, I regret not doing something, as opposed to maybe having a little bit more courage to go and try the thing, but for fear of failure, holding them back.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we think about, we've each probably had a ton of different business ideas or solutions to problems in our lives, right? You could probably list 100 that you've come up with in your lifetime. Maybe? Okay. Right. But you only regret it when you come across that app that you thought about 10 years ago and you're like, someone should create this. I know I'm not going to do it. But what you're doing in that moment is you're seeing in present time the real outcomes of something, and you're regretting back then not doing it. But we're missing all of the steps that it took for that person, that individual, to create, or you, the missed opportunities you would have had in your life had you actually taken the thing and built it. What does that look like?
You know, Daniel Pink talks about this idea of emotions, and he says that a lot of regret is essentially emotion filled. And emotion can be for three things. It can be for nothing.
Yeah.
It can be for feeling, or it can be for action. And he poses to the reader, what do you want it to be? And he doesn't tell us. He suggests you can make it whatever you want. Maybe just emotions are just emotions, and they're just that, right? Most of us probably hang out oftentimes in a space that emotions are for feeling things, right? And they're both good and bad, right? It's interesting, Jen, right? You talked about this negative stereotype around the idea of regret. So like everybody's looking at the podcast title going, oh, regret. Like I'm just going to skip this one because I don't want to deal with any of these things. So if you've made it this far, congratulations. But maybe there's a way that you can think about regret just as fuel for action.
Yep.
And that has to be what happens, because ultimately, like, regret is inevitable whether you face it or not. And so at the cornerstone of business, you're always going to look back at investments that you didn't make. Many examples, like Yahoo having a chance to buy Google originally back in the day for $1 million. Didn't do that. We know Google. Yahoo, unfortunately, maybe you're using it for your fantasy football, but aside from that, not much else.
Yeah.
You have situations, Starbucks, right, making mistakes along the way, opening too many stores too quickly and getting ahead of themselves. But ultimately, regret is inevitable. But Pink talks about it as this idea that it can be in many ways maybe reversed, or as I would actually prefer to talk about it as, it's reconcilable.
Yep. And I do love that concept. To pause for a second, though, the point of being regretful, you're regretful in the moment, like very present, and you're regretful on a past action. And just to circle back, it's because of a potential desired future outcome. You can only make decisions in your present moment. You can't make choices in the past or the future. And so you're only able to make decisions based on the information that you have in this moment. You can't fast forward. I mean, I would love, right? We could have time traveled. I would have loved to sell a bunch of my stocks, right? In maybe November instead of sitting here today dealing with, right? Yeah. So we can't necessarily project and really see the future. So sitting in the moment and understanding how decisions are made. I like what you said about reconciling. And I think from a personal perspective, we can dive into that. From a business perspective, there's a lot of research that has gone into what corporations spend time doing for, business transactions, for conversations with customers or projects that didn't go forward. They do these postmortems, right? And so they sit down with their team and they assess what went wrong. And what they're doing is they're not going back in the past and changing anything, because you can't do that. But what they're doing is they're preparing the team to assess what they could have done differently, so that next time, because they're assuming there will be another opportunity to sit in front of another customer, whether it's the same or a different one, to make those changes. The thing, though, that I think is really interesting in this reconciliation process is the pre-mortem process. So you sit down with your team and you pretend, here's all the things that could go wrong. Here's all the things my customers can say. Here's all the issues with supply chain, all of the challenges we can face. Everyone comes to the table and creates this whole list of every challenge they're going to face. And then they identify together as a team how they would overcome those obstacles, or how they answer that in the design process and what they're building, to try to proactively create opportunities where those things don't happen.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me, because as we look to kind of like bring this conversation full circle and provide hopefully some value to our listeners, one of the last things that made me feel when I listened to this book, as you go through that, Jen, and not everybody maybe has the foresight to have this pre-mortem, but they do now, is this concept of vulnerability. Like, to admit your regrets is to be vulnerable. To admit your regrets is to say, there are things I wish I'd done differently. And it sounds flawed, doesn't it? Like, it's like, I wish I had. And you're just afraid of maybe that judgment of yourself or from others, that you should have done something different, that you weren't listening to your values. Maybe you weren't aware of your values. And yet, I think that it's in that vulnerability that we actually can hopefully guide ourselves and our businesses forward. One of the things that was also discussed, and I'm going to make this kind of about relationships, because I always say you can't do business by yourself. Yeah. And in the book, Pink talks really one of the more popular regrets that came through from around the world was not spending quality time with maybe parents as they aged, or spending quality time with children, which can be really difficult when you're in the middle of your professional careers, and recognizing that those moments are fleeting. But goes on to talk a little bit about how that changes the way we treat other relationships. So I just think for a moment, if you're listening and you're somewhat inspired to address or to be vulnerable with your regrets, that is the truly first step in reconciling and then making hopefully future decisions in mind with not having that regret a second time.
Absolutely.
So we wanted to pose a few final questions to think about here. So Jen, I'm going to give you the first one.
Are you going to answer these?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
What advice would you give on a young entrepreneur, or maybe somebody who's starting a business for the first time, who has a regret and they realize that they made a mistake? Maybe they didn't take an investment. Maybe they didn't listen to a piece of advice that they should have. And now they're going, oh no, we've certainly seen this actually play out in the center. What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, we've seen that a few times, right? I would say, how big is that impact? Is it something that was just something small? You know, we're so critical of ourselves. I don't know if this happens to you as much as it does to me, but at the end of the day, I spend a lot of time reflecting on what I've done or didn't do that day, and conversations I've had and what I could have said differently. So how big is that problem or the thing that you regret? And what are those key learnings? I love to coach entrepreneurs to be really reflective and journal and write this stuff down. If not for an opportunity to write a really great book when you become successful, but seriously, it is a great way to be reflective and thoughtful. So write down your regrets and write down, what are the 3 things I learned from this? And I say that even for difficult decisions. If you had a really crappy day today, what did you learn from that? Because I truly believe that this is the path we're on, is to learn. We need to grow. We need to develop. And if we're not reflective in that process, then what are we doing?
So I'm going to share this as a piece of advice, if you will. Sharing your regrets can also be therapeutic, as Dan Pink talks about. And so I'm going to make a plug, and we will have this linked somewhere in our comments. There is something now known as the World Regret Survey. It's literally worldregretsurvey.com. It takes 3 minutes, and from around the world, Daniel Pink is anonymously collecting people's regrets. And just by simply sharing them, it's the first step, as we mentioned, to
Did you
going
go in and submit?
I have not yet, and I kind of regret that.
Okay.
So if you're willing to go and check out the regret survey, please do so. And if you have thoughts about regret, we'd love to hear them as well, as an opportunity to grow and to learn from your regrets and to help us all move forward.
Good idea?
Bad idea.
All right, Jen. So for this month's Good Idea, Bad Idea segment, I thought I would tackle a topic around sports because we've just gotten through one of the most exciting and fun seasons of the year. March Madness is now behind us. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, baseball is upon us. Spring is here. We've got all the fun sports this summer coming up. There's been a lot of conversation recently, especially those of us that work in and around the higher education institutions, about NIL and the transfer portal. And ultimately, we have college athletes now being paid essentially to play sports. So for decades, right, college sports were such a long cornerstone of American culture, with millions of people every year flocking back to their alma maters to go tailgate and to go watch the young men and women go out and do their thing on the field. Over the last couple of years, it's changed a little bit. We now have what's known as NIL, name, image, likeness. And as a byproduct of some of the rulings at the higher level courts, we have an opportunity for athletes to capitalize on their NIL. And ultimately, they're making some money to go play ball or whatever it is that they're doing. So you see where I'm heading with this question, Jen. It sparked a lot of conversation in terms of, is this good or is this bad? What does this mean for the structure and the future of college sports as we used to know it? In a world where we saw during this past year's March Madness, many of the players playing for many of the teams weren't actually on those teams the year before. And so what does it mean for the future of college sports? And ultimately, I'm going to ask you, do you think that college sports, college athletes having the opportunity to capitalize on their NIL is a good thing or is a bad thing?
Really interesting topic. And I find us picking topics for the other person that we are actually very passionate about. So I will decide in the next few minutes if I'm going to give you airtime to also contribute thoughts to this.
If not, I'll just submit my own in the comments.
Oh, yeah. And I'll read it during our
correspondence.
next yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So send that in. There's a lot to unpack here. And I think it depends. This is how I start them all. It depends. I think it depends on the athlete and the sport. I feel very strongly, as we teach entrepreneurship, as we teach individuals to take their brands, they take this idea they have and they cultivate it into something to create economic freedom and opportunity for themselves. So I feel like we stand on that platform. So it is hard to go backwards in time and then say, well, there is actually, though, impact on the entire system. So what that's doing, I think, with NIL is creating some misalignment in maybe what the value system is that we've created at the university around students, student athletes, opportunity. When do they become professionals versus when are they truly just a student as part of our population that's playing for a sport that they love and that they're good at? I think it changes the dynamics. We think about UConn, who's had a tremendous history of success in sport. And we always hear about basketball, but we've got a lot of other great sports under our roof. And Gino and the women's team, like, they have done a lot over these last 40 years. He has completely changed, though, I think, the business model of how he's operating his shop. And it's no longer, the core maybe no longer recruiting for potential or recruiting for leadership and training and cultivating these young women to be amazing players. It's really turning into a business for them to buy and sell based on how they want their season to unfold. And unfortunately, it's just like the economics of what this industry has created. And it's going to take an industry-wide shift for anything to go back to how it was or to grow and improve in the future. What do you think?
There's a lot to unpack here, and I feel like when we go to answer questions of these nature, it's best to go back to your roots. I was thinking a lot about this over the past month. So my roots coming from Gaelic games back in Ireland, and just to share with our listeners for a second, in Ireland there's two primary sports, there's Gaelic football and hurling, and there are athletes, both men and women, that play at the highest level. They're high performance athletes, they're incredibly fit, and they sell out stadiums with 80, 90,000 people in them. They do not get paid. You play for where you're from. So if you were born in a county, you grow up and you play for your county. And there's tremendous pride. And what that does is it makes things rather parochial. And it means that like your ultimate goal, if you're an athlete, if you're interested in these two sports, is to try to get to the pinnacle, to bring your county, your town, your parish to the very top for one day, right? To say that we're champions. I grew up and I loved that model because for me, it was this like closeness of community. And I always used to try to draw parallels when I would describe these roots to my friends. I would say it's a little bit like college sports, where like you go and you play for your college or your university and you take great pride in it. I can no longer make that comparison, right? It's different now because I see college sports having entered a space where it truly is professional. And why or how did this happen? NIL, I'll briefly say, I love advancing thought leadership for individuals. You are your own brand.
Yep.
Why wouldn't you be your own business? So my take on it is that it is a good idea, and I have one caveat. It is that while they are students, right, that I hope that they still find a way to maintain a student-first mentality, to get an education that will live with you, please God, much past your days as an athlete, number one. But secondly, I think if they are able to bring in revenue to our programs, to our universities, how can we find a way to distribute those funds throughout the entire university to create benefits and opportunities for all of the folks at the university, faculty, students, staff, across the board, right? Bringing the entire university along with them, just like in my roots, right? Just like the way that you would bring your parish or your parochial town with you, right? To climb the mountaintop, being able to make sure we can bring them all with us. Because one of the things that we're going to experience here over the next several weeks is that teams that won championships this year, college teams that won championships, there may very well be players that are going to leave those rosters and go play for other colleges and other universities. And I think to myself, but no, ideally they're from here, but they're not, right? Because now they're ultimately athletes playing on teams. And so, as you mentioned, Jen, lots and lots to unpack. Maybe, we'll get a chance to unpack some of this when we take Timely Topics on the road here and we go down for our event. But in the meantime, I'm sure lots of our listeners have thoughts and ideas about this. So send them in, and we'd love to read some of those out on our future correspondence. All right, that's our show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to share this episode with your friends or drop us an idea for a future episode, topic, or guest.
And don't forget, we produce our show right here in the Collaboratory studio at CCEI in the heart of downtown Hartford.
Until next time, we're wishing you good luck in all your endeavors.